We have called everybody, and we are telling each and every officer here, go back home, relook at the budget, relook at the expenditure, look at what is excessive as far as your institution is concerned, and make sure that you are in line with the policy. A meeting that can be held in Nairobi is not necessary for somebody to go to Mombasa, and that we have addressed. You heard the PS Treasury you saying that we can even change and even use SGR to save on costs.
Where necessary, for instance, if we have very many people going to Mombasa, heads of every public service, why don't you come up with a policy that we use SGR? Like if we have money, we can go, all of us, even us, we can fly. Then we can go by SGR. Then we reduce, because amounts sometimes we spend so much.
All right, that is Felix Koskei, the head of public service, and after him was the PS Treasury, PS Kiptoo. They are talking about the government expenditure, because the control of budget has come out and said that out of the resources that were implemented in the budget of up to June 2023, only 14.8% went to development programs. There was travel costs that amounted to 20.3 billion shillings. A lot of resources are going to paying salaries, or what you may call recurrent expenditure, servicing debt, and you're not in a good place because the public debt has now hit 10.25 trillion shillings. We're above the ceiling of 10 trillion shillings that should have taken us to June 2024. Let's begin with you again, Honorable Mboye, on this, especially on those concerns that you are continuously now losing how much you spend on development. It is actually getting worse, and at a time that the government is thinking of new ways of seeking revenue, when does this stop? Because 85% is too high for recurrent.
Yeah, Sam, it's very, very high, and it's true we have to figure out where does the government stop, because we see what the government immediately did is go into the pockets of Kenyans to try and raise revenue. The folly with that, in my opinion, is first and foremost already in Kenya, when you work, there's something they call double jeopardy, I think, in law. This one is not even double, it's like triple, because when you work, you're taxed. And the little money you remain with, when you go to spend it, whatever you're purchasing is also taxed. And whatever property or wealth you develop out of these taxed monies that have remained after spending on taxed items, it is also taxed. I mean, it is quite a pity. I think the government needs to figure out other ways. But coming to think about the issue of what is happening and why is it we're in the hole that we are in, one of the things that the Controller of Budget has proposed is that we have a huge public debt. You know, apparently our public debt has already hit the 10 trillion bracket. In fact, she's pointed it to be at 10.25 trillion.
Right.
And that's quite high. And you know, that's one of the biggest problems we are facing. We have borrowed excessively over the years. I think when Kibaki left office, the public debt was about 1.8 trillion. 5 years of Uhuru and Ruto, first 5 years, they left it at 5.8 trillion. That would be about 4 trillion borrowed. Uhuru's second term, he borrowed about 2.6 trillion. So that was about 8.4 trillion when this regime came into power. And now you can see it's already at 10.25 trillion, meaning that the borrowing that has existed over the years has actually increased. And that is why we are having this problem, because and let me say, the Controller of Budget has also indicated that even though we are borrowing, we are unable now to borrow on long-term, to take long-term debts, because the investors are not interested in lending Kenya long-term, giving Kenyan long-term loans, because already we are at public debt distress. So they're giving us short-term loans, you know, and those have very high interest rates. So I think we are kind of continuing to dig ourselves into a hole. What surprises me, Sam, is that the Kenya Kwanza regime, during their campaigns, they were very categorical that one of the problems we are facing as a country is excessive borrowing. But I can say borrowing is not necessarily bad if you can figure out how to pay and if you use the money constructively. We can tell you things that were done during the period of Kibaki. There's a lot of projects, major projects done within the period when Uhuru was president. This regime has been in power over a year, and I can tell you there's very little to show for it. They have borrowed, but then the money is, I think they're borrowing to just pay debt. So it's a very dire situation that we're in. I've also noted that, the departments of government have increased, and this is all from the same report, from 68 to 81. And, every department that comes up, there is obviously costs, overhead costs that will be, it's automatic because you have to set up offices. You saw the other day in the fight between, I think, the DP and the Trade Ministry, that apparently the Trade Ministry had relocated to some, posh neighborhood, I think near Gigiri somewhere, where they had taken up offices and they were, bundled back when they started having a fight. So there is a lot of excessive expenditure by this government. And I think that's what we need to address. Maybe the matter of public servants, excesses by public servants is also a point of concern. Right. And this is something I've always wondered. Why is it that, if the government owns institutions like there's a government school somewhere, I think on Thika Road. Yeah. Why is it that when the government wants to do some short courses a day or two, they will take them to hotels, expensive hotels, at the expense of their own facilities that they have? So there's a lot of things that need to be done. But at the end of the day, I think we need to sit down as a country and figure out how do we reduce our expenditure. I have always been of this opinion. A budget of a country is just like a budget of a business and also like a budget of a home. You cannot budget for what you do not have. If you know you have a debt, then you know you have to set aside that money because you have to pay your debt. If you have to pay your rent, you have to set aside that money. Whatever remains for consumption, you have to figure it out. If you had a project that you wanted to undertake and the money is not enough, you have to postpone that project. The problem is that we are constantly trying to do more things when we don't have enough money. I think that's what we need to figure out ourselves. What must be done so that we can save on this public expenditure?
So where does that begin? Because Parliament has a say on that.
Yes, I'm not saying we are not, we don't have a say. I've just said that's what we need to do. But some have always said this, and I've said this like numerous times in this show, that even though Parliament seems independent, Parliament is also controlled democratically by numbers. And the people with the numbers in Parliament today is Kenya Kwanza. So even when they bring a draconian law like the recent finance bill, we will do anything we can. We can stand on our chairs and shout, but they will still pass it. So at the end of the day, we end up in talk shows just telling Kenyans you're in trouble.
Like you're doing now. Honorable Kagiri, so we are reducing the much we spend on development. What do we do? Yes, there are pressing needs, but what do we do? Because when I look at even the travel cost of 20.3 billion shillings, Parliament accounted for more than 9 trillion shillings. If you had to put Parliament together with the Office of the President, the Office of the Deputy President, and the Office of the Prime Cabinet Secretary, it comes to 10.6 billion shillings, which is more than 50% of the entire travel by the public sector. What are the solutions?
I would join my colleague in confirming that first we need to agree as a country that we are not in a situation that allows us to remain extravagant. First, we must take up austerity measures that will ensure that we reduce the costs and the kind of spending that we are doing as a government. Even as Parliament, it's time we start having our sittings, our committee meetings in Parliament and its vicinity, rather than going to hotels and maybe traveling to have those meetings. Because where we stand as a country, we can no longer keep doing things as we are doing them. And I totally agree that, number one, we need to realize that we are already in bad debt, and this debt has to be paid. And of course, my colleague has said what happens in Parliament is beyond their control, but it's also good for him to mention how else would we raise resources for this country, because number one, they know we are in debt. Number two, the country has to continue running, and that is why we had the finance bill to answer to those questions on how we would raise the resources towards facilitating the country. But that said, of course, there are still very many good things that Kenya Kwanza government has done. And in fact, when we speak on the matters development, let's not forget, Honorable Mbui, that we have already employed 56,000 teachers. That is an expense that the government has taken into. We have already increased the allocation of JSS from 10 billion to 15 billion. Of course, that is money. If we had not done that, the same as Azimio would be saying, Kenya Kwanza government has failed. If we look at fertilizer, we are not talking of heading to issuing to around 5 million farmers fertilizer. And this is from 7,000 shillings to now 2,500 shillings. So a lot is still being done on the development side, not forgetting that every year we have to pay around almost 1 trillion on debt.
How is that development? What you just described, how is it development expenditure? What,
employing teachers is not?
Is recurrent.
How is that development?
Yeah, sorry, that is recurrent. I agree, that's recurrent.
So, and therefore the question I'm asking, because if the economy has to improve, yes, it's good to pay salaries, but if you're not developing, then it's not going to work in the long run. I mean, it continues to decline. We get to a point where at 5% of development. How do we stop this?
And that's what we've agreed, that we need to control the spending we're doing as a
How do you do
government.
that, Honorable Kagire?
I've already said taking up austerity measures where we need to control the number of troubles we take up. Where we can save, we need to all start saving. That's my proposal.
Honorable Cheng, tell me, I've not attended those because I'm not a public servant, but why is it so important to deal with certain meetings out of office, out of town?
I'll tell you this out of my head. It's extremely important. In fact, I disagree with both the hopes and the PS Treasury on this matter.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you're talking about 20 billion in a budget of 3 trillion, and that's why you're focusing. Look, if you do what I hear saying here, oh, stop meetings, all the hotels at the coast will close. A couple of them in Naivasha will close. A number of them in Kisumu will close. The biggest expender of money in any economy is government. Where do the waiters down there go? Where do the waiters in the hotels in Naivasha go? If every time there's an issue of budget, then the first thing is travel, meetings in hotels. The biggest issue we have in this country is not those meetings. I don't believe so.
What is?
The biggest issue we have is the money that we are bleeding through corruption, over budgeting, development projects, over budgeting, even recurrent. The issue is not quite about those meetings. The issue is the over budgeting. You know, you've been told severally that you budget corruption. So every single project that you plan to do, there's always something in there. I don't believe 20 billion is so much amount of money that I would go to town about in a budget of 3 trillion.
Only that when it's 50% by the political class, it's a lot, isn't it?
Okay, I'm talking about a global sum because I've looked at the figures here. We are spending in a year now more than $500 billion paying debt. Debt.
It's actually more than $1 trillion.
Yeah?
More than $1 trillion.
Every year paying debt. And then you tell me that 20 billion shillings is a problem? I disagree completely. We need just...
So when you keep hearing of austerity measures, what are those?
I'm just saying that it is the wrong... We're actually targeting the wrong horse. We are flogging the wrong horse here. I can never agree that in a budget of 3 trillion, 20 billion becomes the horse to be flogged, and you leave the 2.9 something. I mean, it just doesn't make, in one period, economic sense. So we said that we will do a zero-sum budget. We are not doing that now.
Is it possible?
That's what I'm saying. It's not possible because, look at just what you just said now. In this budget we're having now, 630 billion is being spent in one sector, education. Necessary. In fact, I disagree with the fact of you describing that as recurrent, because it's not recurrent, it's capital. You are infusing this issue of paying teachers. Yes,
those
it could.
Those are salaries.
Yes,
how is that capital?
It could be described as recurrent, but it's a one-off infusion of 56,000 teachers. It's never happened before.
So it is
It's still recurrent.
I agree, yes, but describing it as if it's always been there, for me, we are missing the point. We just introduced a huge number of teachers that required an infusion of initial capital investment to enable these guys come on board. Then after that initial one, it becomes recurrent. That's what I believe. So having these 56,000 teachers coming on board, you've seen we're just trying to ensure that there are areas where we're making sense. But I wanted to come to another issue, just on this issue of austerity measures, Sam.
Right.
We currently have 300, actually more than 300 odd parastatals. More than 300 odd parastatals. And every government that has come since Kibaki have talked about reducing the number of parastatals. And some of these parastatals, by the way, Sam, the kind of money they get for development in a year is 10% of their recurrent expenditure. And I can give you examples. These water bodies, all these water bodies that we have, why do we need them when you have county governments being able to do water? Why don't you just fold all of them up? This Tanathi, this Victoria South Water Service Board, fold them up. Let this money go to national government, to the county government. Then you're going to make savings in 100 billions, not 20 billion for travel, for MPs and for civil servants. No. Let's hit it where it's important. If you just rationalize, because Uhuru Kenyatta had a committee set up, chaired by Awondo. Here, since we came to power, I've had Don Mudavadi talk about this bloated wage bill from MDAs severally in meetings. What's difficult in saying, yes, for bodies that are carrying out functions that have county implications, move them to the counties. You will end up with less than 200 parastatals. You deal with that at that level and ease off. You'll save so much money. Number two, come to every ministry's budget, remove the pork and the barrel. Go to every ministry, check what didn't we need, and then go to what Honorable Mbuya has said. Plan or budget for development expenditure on things you will do. Because even if you look at this budget today, you'll find the budget for development, 200 billion. Some of the projects are feasibility stage. They'll spend a whole year. The money is in paper that we have this money for development, but the whole 12 months will be some of feasibility. That money gets returned to the treasury. We just did a budget. How many months ago? 2 months ago, 3 months ago. We are now again due for a supplementary. Supplementing what? When you've not even spent, we've not even used the budget we passed.
Yeah, and as you say that...
So the point that I wanted just to push through is that we should budget for what we intend to really and actually spend. The idea of just banding around numbers, 3 trillion budget, 2.7 billion budget, when you don't intend to use it, I think for me send the wrong signals also.
And when you say that, we saw the control of budget talking about Article 223 that allows government to spend money that is outside budget. And she talks about more than 15 billion shillings that was already approved by the National Treasury. Never mind that some of the requests came as early as the month of July. Then what is the essence of budgeting, Honorable Mbui, if a few weeks after passage of the budget, you go back to requesting for resources that are said to be an emergency, including the control of budget, the controller of State House asking for some 400 million shillings to buy cars urgently?
You know, the Constitution's provision is fair and is right. Because there are times when an emergency could arise that was totally unforeseen, and the government needs to step in and support. Okay, we know that there is probably likely to be El Nino rains, but assuming that that was not known before the budget, then clearly you can't prepare for it unless you know in advance. And so if anything was to happen, some devastating, natural calamities, then obviously the government can step in to spend some money to sort that out. And that's why there is that provision that allows the government to spend a little and then seek the approval of Parliament afterwards. Unfortunately, as you've said, purchase of cars for leaders may not be exactly what we call an emergency. And this is one area that has been constantly abused. In fact, from the time I joined Parliament from 2013 to date, it's almost every year there is going to be some abuse of that article. The Treasury is going to spend some money and then come back to Parliament for ratification. And I'll tell you again the danger we face, even based on that article. Yes, there can be a time when we can, as Parliament, say, no, we are not ratifying. But then what do you do? Recently, after the regime changeover, the Kenya Kwanza team said that they are not going to ratify the excess expenditure on subsidies that were provided towards the tail end of Uhuru Kenyatta's regime. And they said, no, there's, I think, something like 4 billion or 5 billion. No, we are not going to accept these. They rejected the proposal. But then what happens? already that money has been incurred. It's already a debt. And you know, governments exist in perpetuity. So even if it is not your regime, as long as government of the Republic of Kenya incurred an expenditure and there is a debt, it eventually must be paid. So we went round, we made a lot of noise, and eventually I think they've come to the realization that you still have to sort it out. So I think the article is right, but I think there's a lot of abuse. We need to just be careful with how we do our budgeting.
Okay. And Honorable Kagiri, because when you look at some of the details by the Controller of Budget is that, for instance, the State Department of Energy requested to use some 1.25 billion shillings for funding of Eastern Electricity Highway Project, Ethiopia-Kenya Interconnector, to facilitate settlement of pending unpaid contractual invoices. And I saw another one that was meant to go to the price stabilization of fuel in the month of August to September. What do you do to control this? Because when a department is sitting down to write its own estimates, their expectation is that they have been able to look at everything. So when a budget is approved and barely a month later there are requests, yes, it's provided for in law, but how do you mitigate that, especially not very early in a year, because then again it ends up pushing the budget to even higher limits?
On this, I would think, again, the departments have to actually sit and know what they're presenting to Parliament or to the committees before the budget is passed. Because coming back 2 months or 3 months later, of course, we also read unpreparedness in that and also wonder what is that they saw that they hadn't seen when they were coming to present to the committees. And again, I may not be very good with these financials, but the bottom line is I wish we would see results in all these requests that have been made. Because when we say further connection of electricity, I wish we don't have to see on news, like the lady in Turkana yesterday who was crying and saying electricity is coming from their area and surpassing them and going to other areas. So I just wish these requests for reallocations and allocations are actually going to the to direct benefit of the Kenyan person. Yes. Okay.
Honorable Cheng, what are your thoughts? Because, yes, you said that 20.3 billion shillings for travel is very minimal. But then again, these other requests that come along the way, they end up pushing the budget higher. In fact, some of them, because they are recurrent in nature, then you will find that they are the ones that are responsible for reducing that development share. At the moment, I think the allocation is about 700 and is it 40 billion shillings for the, yes, 740.7 billion shillings for development expenditure for this year. But chances are that it will not all be spent on development. The report will be very...
What chances are that not even half will be spent on development. And that's the point I'm trying to make. That if, as Parliament, we are to make headway and give Kenyans value for money, there's a way in which we must put our feet down and say, for example, what we just read for us, the 223, you know, I'm reading this with a lot of foreboding. Because, you know, you're having 1.8 trillion for stabilizing the petroleum pump. I think something that is very, very justifiable. But you would have just budgeted for it. Because we have the petroleum levy. We knew this could happen. These dryers, we knew that we are giving out fertilizer. We knew that there'll be harvest. And we've been, all our leaders, I'm talking about a prospect of a bumper harvest.
Right.
Including myself. We knew we'll need dryers. Why would we put it out of the budget? Why can't we put it in the budget? This 2 trillion.
2.2 trillion.
2.2 trillion for buying...
billion.
This is not small money. This is not small money. This should have been gotten in the budget. And even if you are to move things, I would imagine these are the things that you should be moving in the supplementary, not other things. These things that are important, things that we thought we needed to have done and we didn't budget for. But if it becomes the modus operandi that in 3 months, the kind of money you've now withdrawn out of 223 are almost getting to a quarter of the money we should spend on development, then I think it's worrying. Then why are we budgeting in the first place? If within 2-3 months of our budgeting, we are already using an article that was meant for emergency situations to buy motor vehicles, to deal with issues of youth employment opportunities and and I'm just looking at the other one to deal with there's one I saw here that was quite interesting about about wings to fly. So how is that an emergency? And so I think we need to go back to Parliament to discipline.
Which one is that? Which date?
The use of, I was just looking at, there's one I saw here just a few minutes ago, motor vehicles. Yeah, if you look at the wings to fly one, 200 million. Wings to fly funding for promotion of youth employment through scholarship phase, blah, blah, blah. Why didn't we budget for this? So I believe that in Parliament we'll have to go back and change the law and provide specific disciplines and beacons on when you can use 223, so that everything else comes in the budget. And then when it comes in the budget, we in Parliament again must ensure, and we started doing this the last Parliament, it didn't work very well, ensure that Parliament is oversighting by following every month the ministries reporting to us. We budgeted this money for these particular projects. How much has been spent? What is the problem? If the issue is a cash flow, then we then cut our cloth according to our size. We go back and say, we budgeted this. This money was supposed to be released in July or in August. It can't be released. Reason, we had no money.
So what do we do to, because we have already hit the ceiling, there's been the talk about a debt anchor of 55% of the GDP. Even if we were to do it, we're already past it. What do we do?
We're in very dire straits, Sam. And this is where I believe it is not even about the government of the day. It's about the country together, thinking and saying, this is the hole we find ourselves in. And it doesn't matter who took us into that hole. We're already in that hole. And that's why, personally, I'm now getting tired of this thing of this last regime did this last regime did that. Because even this regime will have another one coming after it, which will keep blaming it. That's, for me, not the right way to proceed with the ideas. The right way to proceed with the ideas is, how do we, as a country, where we've reached in this hole we are in, say, this is what we need to do. And if, for example, it requires us to go back to Parliament and say, could parliamentarians have a pay cut? Could everybody else have a pay cut? How much will it be? Because the biggest issue I have not spoken about this morning is the wage bill. If you looked at this thing, the biggest expenditure is the wage bill. So how do you deal with the wage bill? Apart from what I've said about reducing the parastatals, how do you, and when we have also talked about reducing the departments in government, we must consciously discuss the issue of wage bill, because...
Is there a solution there? Because if 1.1 trillion shillings is going to paying personnel emoluments and allowances, who do you fire?
No, you just have to plan and rationalize. You've seen how private sector works. I've seen this happening in banks recently, and even private institutions, where you tell guys that we project to reduce our wage bill in the next 10 years. It doesn't have to be such a steep cut that hurts people, but you decide that for the next 10 years, we want to do this. So we plan that slowly, that if the positions fall vacant, we don't fill them in. Okay? If the boards fall vacant, we do away with that parastatal. We work on it slowly in a manner that, first of all, deals with ensuring that those who are at their work today don't get hurt. But number two, give people handshakes. This happened before.
But you don't have the cash flow to do that.
No, you can. If you project to do in 10 years, you can say that in the next 10 years or next 5 years, we want to ease off this number of people from public service, and you budget for it. Okay. That's what I believe must happen. And then finally, just make public service efficient, so that we have value for money and get more taxes being collected, and the country, growing again.
Okay.
So, I think the real truth is part of our problem is politics. And I'll say this. President Moi did actually try to reduce the wage bill by reducing the size of the public service, the civil servants. And he gave golden handshake. And a lot of young, relatively young then, people retired and went to the villages. Unfortunately, the system, the way it was handled, they were not well prepared. So a lot of them just went to an early grave. But having said that, the reason I'm saying it's politics is because how come subsequently after that, still we ended up bloating the public service? I think it's because there's this tendency when people get into office, they have to reward all their cronies. You've seen in the recent attempt by Kenya Kwanza to bring in all political losers into offices of, they call it chief administrative officer, some illegal office. And they want to populate it with so many characters. All these people would have ended up taking up office. They would also be, still going further into the wage bill. I want to say that for us to kill this thing, and Sam, you are right when you mentioned Parliament. I think Parliament is a solution. But then Parliament must also understand, and that's why I'm happy that I have colleagues here who can tell your viewers whether it is possible, that we can agree as Parliament to start being objective and to stop taking orders from above. Because our parliament is run from outside the house. We have a speaker and we have members from both sides. We have very good ideas. By the way, if you listen to individual members outside the chamber, you'll be shocked. But when they take the mic and speak there, they are speaking to the gallery and speaking to their masters, and everything changes. If we start becoming objective as a parliament and decide that all of us, whether in Azimio or Kenya Kwanza, our responsibility is to oversight this government and to make sure that what they are doing is the right thing, then suddenly you start seeing changes. Because some of this mess that is happening, we can be able to contain it. Okay. Even in the budget making process, Sam, you will be surprised that the Treasury, through the Committee of Budget, control the House. And whatever it is they decide, even if you have better ideas, they will still end up going with their ideas, right, because they've controlled the House. So I think the biggest problem we are having is the issue of politics and the issue of Parliament not taking up its mandate. Can I continue to talk about two other things?
No, just hold on. I want to hear from.
I'm seeing you fidgeting. No, I'm just about to finish. I thought we wanted to go on a break, but there are two very important
just
things.
Hold on. We're still here. Honorable Kagire, tell me, how difficult or easy is it for you? It's been 1 year as a parliamentarian. How difficult or easy is it for you to be yourself, not just to carry the agenda of your party, your coalition, your leader?
Sam, it's been very easy. The first motion I tabled in Parliament was in regards to the reduction on cost of electricity. If it was difficult, or if I was listening to any master, I wouldn't have tabled that motion. So I would believe most of the members of Parliament are objective. We know what took us.
It did?
Yes, it did.
Was it
unanimously?
Implemented?
Yes.
Was it implemented?
It's not in the implementation.
Some you need to understand the difference between a motion and a bill. A motion is just a talk shop.
No, just hold on. No,
talk shop. There's no implementation.
It was her question. So
at least I'm sure it's being implemented.
Honorable Mbowe,
I'm sure it's
That's
being
what they're doing.
Honorable Mbowe, I would challenge you. In your
implemented?
first 1 year, were you able to table a motion and a tough motion like that one? So allow me to enjoy my credit for now, whether it was a motion or a bill.
Gladly.
But that said, anybody would have called me and told me, Jane, this was...
So was it implemented? That's what I'm asking.
It's in the implementation stage. Yes.
The motion suggested that you reduce the cost of power.
Yes.
It's not.
And I gave various recommendations, which one included that they should not take up any more IPPs, and they have to review the cost on the current IPPs that we have. And what else was there?
Which is ongoing as you speak.
It's ongoing. Yes.
Interesting stuff.
You even look surprised, Sam.
It's ongoing.
Yeah.
It's because of the... I think I know the cost of power has actually gone up.
Very, very much more.
No,
extremely.
We are on the implementation.
As a consumer, I know that.
Yes.
So I want us to listen to what the Deputy President said while in